In this video, we'll be going over the advantages of using signals as opposed to using observables in Angular 17 and above. Now, I have based this off of an article which is based off of a book that I read earlier on called Modern Angular by Armen Vardanyan. In this book, he mentions 8 advantages of using signals in the reactive paradigm against using observables. And in Angular, these advantages are that values can always be read. Reading the value does not affect the application in any way. Values can be changed on the fly. Everything is synchronous. We can perform side effects based on the changes of the value. We can create new reactive values from existing ones. Unsubscriptions are automatic, and signals are interoperable with RxJS. Now, let's go ahead and dive into this code that I have here. On the left-hand side, I have written the component using signals, and on the right-hand side, I have written the component using observables. Each one of them has their own template, and now let's begin. Here in the app component, we'll notice that on the right-hand side, we need to use async pipes in order to retrieve the latest value for the observables. That is something that is not happening here on the left-hand side. And as a newcomer, you see this and you instantly get perplexed by the async pipe because you need to understand what it does. It's a concept to grasp and understand that what it's doing is subscribing to the loaded observable. Here on the left-hand side, it's easier to understand and it's also easier to write, shorter and cleaner. That is the advantage of having the values being always able to read them. And on the, for example, on the template itself, you have instances where you need to get the user profile, which is in the user auth service itself. It's a signal. However, if you were not using signals and you needed to react to this value like you do in the reactive paradigm, you will need to understand that using observables, you will have to subscribe to this value in order to get its latest, subscribe to the property or the observable in order to get the latest value. As you do here on the right hand side, you see that if I wanted to get the username, I will need to subscribe to the user profile, because what happens, for example, if there is a lag in the network and I don't have this value yet I'm reading and I'm trying to display the username, it wouldn't be possible and it would throw an error because it's the user profile is null or undefined. Whereas now you have to understand that you need to use a filter in order to get the correct value here. And on the left hand side, you treat this as if it was, well, as what it is, which is synchronous code, and you can always have access to the value just by calling by using the parentheses on the signal. So for example, this operation here becomes much simpler and easier to understand, given that the value can always be read. Advantage number 1. All you need to do is use the parentheses. Okay, now let's go over advantage number 2. Advantage number 2 says that reading the value does not affect the application in any way. Now, let's see, for example, here, we wanted to get the value of the loaded property. This here is a signal, a computed signal to be exact, which is defined here. Now, it's declared here, and what that says is that every time that either the route or the login change, let's recompute this value. So You can see that being done here on the right. And you also notice that here on the right, we had to reintroduce a variable, basically the same variable, which is called loaded, because we can't access the observable just by calling it like how we do with the signal. Now, that is a huge advantage because we don't have to track two variables, and basically we have a solid location for a source of truth, which is this signal here. Here we have to track this and make sure that we set it every time that the loaded stream fires again. And that becomes a problem because now we have another possible value for this loaded function. Not only that, we're also tracking it here in the template. And you can see that it's already affecting the application. And another great example mentioned by Armen Vardanyan in his modern Angular book of how observables affect application code is the fact that you don't always know what the observable is calling. Like over here, for example, I am referring to user profile, and that is in turn wired up to a service, and users don't always know what that is calling behind the scenes. So, for example, it might be calling an HTTP call, and that might not be what we desire right now. Observables such as this one, where multiple other observables are being called in the stream, subscribed to as well, you don't know what they're doing behind the scenes, and it becomes harder to track. And that's now we're only talking about a few observables. Imagine when you have hundreds of observables in the same application and they're each calling each other, then it's much simpler to refer to them as we do here, knowing that we're only getting the latest value from the stream and not going through the whole stream again. That's it for advantage number 2. Reading the value does not affect the application in any way. Now for advantage number 3. Values can be changed on the fly. This can be seen here, how we do error.set, and that simply updates the value of the error property. And we can see here on the right how it's harder to manage because in order to always have the latest value, we need to subscribe to it again. And although we're changing it using a behavior subject, we're also having to subscribe to it and always in order to react to it. As to here on the left with signals, the only difference is that we're using an effect here. However, if we were to read it somewhere else synchronously, we can do so and we'll be getting the latest value from it. It doesn't differ a lot from behavior subjects, although it is simpler to manage because again, you don't have to subscribe to it and then worry about having a subscription to worry about. You can see here, for example, I have a subscription that I had to derive from a behavior subject, and now I forgot the until destroyed method. And that becomes a problem because now you're forgetting subscriptions to unsubscribe, and that becomes harder to manage. So, for advantage number 3, against using observables, why using signals is better, is the fact that values can be changed very, very easily compared to observables. In fact, you can't even change the value of an observable. It's just that I am treating this as an observable. If you wanted to change the value of an observable, you wouldn't be able to because observables are immutable. So if I wanted to do something like this route, then I would be destroying the observable. If I was to do this error that's set, we would still be referring to the same signal. We're just updating its value. But here would be destroying it completely, losing the reference to our original observable, which causes other problems along all these other subscriptions that we have. So that's it for advantage number 3. Now let's move on to advantage number 4. So another advantage brought up by Armen Vardanyan in his Modern Angular book is that when using signals, everything is synchronous. And that means that making calls to functions such that rely on a signal such as user profile becomes more manageable. You will see here on the right hand side, if I wanted to make sure that user profile was always available, I will need to have knowledge of the filter function, or the filter operator, or for example the starts with operator, in order to make sure that this does not return an error. So for example, if the user profile response from the observable gets delayed by 10 seconds, you will see an error saying that the user is not available. And that can be demonstrated here if we were to refresh this and wait. You will see that the the user gets set. However, this is being delayed, so it doesn't find the username or the user object in this user profile observable. And if we were to rid of this, we will wait until this is available in order to use it. However, that requires more extensive knowledge of RxJS operators, which can be daunting to new developers. And here on the left hand side, by using the signal accessor, we can just get the latest value and only fire this effect and call this display message once this is available, just by using a simple if statement. That we can easily read these values without having to subscribe to them and without having to have any other function calls which retrieve its latest value. All you need to do is call the accessor on the signal and it'll retrieve the latest value for you. Which this all makes the code a lot more manageable easier to read and to develop. The next advantage of using signals over observables in your Angular components is the fact that you can perform side effects based on changes of a value. What this means, as we learned in the Armen Vardanyan Modern Angular book, is that we can simply do this, as you see highlighted on the screen, where you have an effect function, and inside of it you have a signal and whatever you want to happen when when this signal changes. As you can see on the left hand side of the screen is the effect, and inside of it we're checking if the user profile is set, and if it is, we do the display message. Now when we're logged out, the user profile is not set. Now what's magical about this is that every time this changes, it propagates throughout the component, and everything that's being referenced by this inside of an effect is going to change as well. It's going to trigger a change for the effect. So what that means is, if you look at it in the way that is written in an observable, for example here, it would be the same as saying that whenever user profile fires to run the stream again, over here is this happens inside of an effect. So we're checking that every time the user profile changes, the display message function gets called with a current user profile value. Now that's a big step from having to subscribe and from having to account for all these operators, especially the unsubscribing operators where you do take until destroyed, or even a combined latest. This requires more knowledge of RxJS operators and how streams and observables work. And to the left hand side, we see how simple it is using an effect. That is advantage number 5 is huge, because you can cut down your code by a whole lot, and the complexity of the code as well, because now you're not requiring such in-depth knowledge as you would with subscriptions and RxJS operators. Now let's move on to advantage number 6, which is actually quite similar. Advantage number 6 says that we can create new reactive values from existing ones. What that means is that we can observe loaded from places like the template without even using the async pipe like we would over here to the right. All we're doing is deriving a new value from these two values, and every time these two values change, which are signals, so will the loaded value, because it gets recomputed. And as we saw earlier, what happens is that whenever we access the loaded value in the template, we simply access its latest value without going through the whole stream. And basically like an observable works, that every time you access its value, you're subscribing to it, you're re-going through the whole stream. Instead, this saves the latest value and displays it or retrieves it onto the user. Here to the right, we see that in order to derive this function, this loaded value, we have to subscribe to it, and we also have to go through all these operators. And what can be done in all these steps here can simply be done with this line. It doesn't require knowledge of map or combined latest, or the fact that you're subscribing to two other observables when you're doing this. That is in-depth knowledge that can hinder your developer's speed and performance, because now while debugging, you also have to account for these extra observables. Instead, you can use the computed function, which you can derive a value from other values in a couple of lines. Not only that, you can then go ahead back into the component, into the template, where you can reference that value quite simply. That's it for advantage number 6, brought up by Armen Vardanyan in his Modern Angular book. Now let's move on to advantage number 7. This is also a big one because unsubscriptions are automatic, meaning that you don't have to subscribe to anything in order to get these events, in order to react to these events. All you really need to do is place them inside a function or in your template in order to get their latest values and in order to update the stream and make whatever effects happen that you need to happen. That is a big advantage because we all know how easy it is to lose track of subscriptions and how easy it is to forget methods like take until destroyed. Now, that would be a big win for people who are trying to make developing easier for not only for new developers but also developers who've been at it for a while. You can simply see how it eases the load on the developer. Now, lastly, for our number 8 advantage is the fact that this is interoperable with RxJS. So for example, here I'm deriving a computed signal from events on the router. So I've injected the router here, and then I have derived a signal from the events observable. You can pipe through the signal as well, through the events as well, perform whatever operation you need, and that will get saved as a value, which is basically synchronous, and you can access it wherever you need in your component simply by using the signal accessor that you see here with the 2 parentheses, and then you will be able to access the latest value from route without subscribing to anything and without having to unsubscribe to it as well. The same goes for the component. You can access, for the template, you can access the value of route without having to subscribe to it. I hope you guys have seen the great advantages that this brings over to the Angular world and how signals are the new way to program in a simpler manner your reactive paradigm and not have to deal with tons of unsubscriptions and operators and mixing subscriptions with other operators, or rather observables. And I hope you've also found it as useful as I have and start implementing it in your Angular components. Thank you for watching. If you guys like the video, please like the video. And thank you.